The young nurse discovered her hospital was putting patients at risk. When she tried to report it, they threatened her career. Then the father of a little girl she saved, a mafia boss, offered protection. Not violence, just a promise. No one would silence her while she found the truth. The fluorescent lights hummed like angry bees above Ray Cooper's head as she peeled off her surgical gloves. 11 hours. That's how long Dr. Hendricks had taken to repair the damage from a car accident that should have killed a 23-year-old kid named Devin. But Devin was alive, stitched back together, and heading to recovery. That's what mattered. Ray's feet screamed inside her sneakers. Her scrub stuck to her back with dried sweat. But she smiled anyway because Devin's mother had hugged her so tight in the waiting room that Ray forgot, just for a second, how exhausted she was. "Hey, Cooper." Ray turned. It was Linda, one of the senior surgical nurses, 20 years on the job, gray streaks in her ponytail, eyes that had seen everything twice. "Yeah." Linda held up a sealed metal container, the kind used for surgical tools. "You mind running this down to sterilization? My shift ended 10 minutes ago, and my daughter's got a recital." "Sure, no problem." Ray took the container. It was heavier than she expected. Linda squeezed her shoulder. "You did good in there tonight, kid. Hendricks is a pain, but you kept up." Ray watched Linda disappear down the hallway, her clogs squeaking against the linoleum. Then she looked down at the container in her hands. Something fell off. The label read, "Single-use instruments, or 3. Dispose after surgery." Ray frowned. Linda had said sterilization, not disposal. Maybe she'd misspoken. People made mistakes when they were tired. Ray had almost put a patient's chart in the trash instead of the file slot last week. Still, protocol was protocol. She turned toward the disposal room, but hesitated. What if Linda had meant sterilization and the label was old? What if Ray threw away $500 worth of tools because she didn't double-check? Her stomach twisted. She hated moments like this, caught between rule and reality, trying to guess which version of right would get her yelled at less. The sterilization department was in the basement. Ray took the elevator down, the container heavy against her hip. The basement always felt colder, quieter. Like the hospital saved all its warmth for the patients upstairs and forgot about the people working below. When she pushed through the double doors, she found 2 techs leaning against the counter, scrolling on their phones. One of them, a guy named Eugene, looked up. "What you got?" "Surgical tools from OR3. Ray set the container on the counter. "I think there's a label issue. It says single-use, but..." "Nah, it's fine." Eugene didn't even glance at the label. He just grabbed the container and tossed it onto a cart already loaded with a dozen others. "We get those all the time." Ray blinked. "But if they're single-use..." "Look, Cooper." Eugene's tone was patient, like he was explaining gravity to a child. "Single-use is more of a suggestion. You know how much those kits cost? Hospital can't afford to trash them every time. We sterilize, we reuse. It's how it's always been." "But that's not safe." The other tech, a woman with red-framed glasses, laughed. "You new here or something?" "I've been here 8 months. "Then you should know by now, we don't waste around here. Orders from the top." Ray felt her throat tighten. She wanted to argue, to pull out her phone and show them the FDA guidelines she'd memorized in nursing school. But Eugene was already turning away, and Red Glasses was back on her phone, and Ray was just a 26-year-old nurse at the end of a double shift who probably didn't know what she was talking about. She rode the elevator back up in silence, her mind spinning. Orders from the top. That phrase stuck in her head like a splinter. Back on the surgical floor, the hallway was nearly empty. Most of the staff had clocked out. A janitor pushed a mop bucket past her, humming softly. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped. Ray headed for the locker room, but paused when she saw a light still on in the supply closet. The door was cracked open. Inside, she could hear voices, low, clipped, tense. She shouldn't eavesdrop. She knew that, but her feet stopped moving anyway. "Third time this month," a man's voice said. Ray recognized it, Tom Briggs, the hospital administrator. If state inspectors show up. They won't, that was a woman. Sharper. Colder. Ray didn't recognize her. We've been doing this for 2 years. No one's complained. Because no one's noticed, Tom hissed. But if a post-op infection gets traced back, then we handle it quietly. Settle out of court. That's what the legal budget is for. Ray's breath caught. I don't like it, Tom said, but his voice had lost its edge. He sounded tired. Beaten. You don't have to like it. You just have to keep your mouth shut and let Dr. Bell do his job. Dr. Bell, the CEO. Ray had only seen him a handful of times. Tall, silver-haired, always in an expensive suit, always smiling like he was posing for a magazine cover. The closet door swung open suddenly, and Ray barely had time to step back and pretend she'd been walking past. The woman, thin, blonde, wearing a blazer, brushed past without looking at her. Tom followed a second later, his face pale and drawn. He glanced at Ray, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or warning. Then he was gone. Ray stood alone in the hallway, her pulse hammering in her ears. She thought about Devon upstairs in recovery. She thought about all the other patients she'd helped care for over the past 8 months. Kids with broken bones, grandmothers with pneumonia, teenagers in car accidents. She thought about single-use instruments being sterilized and reused because it saved money. Orders from the top. Ray pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking. She opened her notes app and typed. Single-use tools reused. Eugene confirmed. Orders from the top. She stared at the words for a long moment. Then she hit save. Because maybe she was wrong. Maybe she was overreacting, seeing problems where there weren't any. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't. And if she wasn't, then someone needed to know. Even if that someone was just her. For now. Ray slept for 4 hours, woke up tangled in her sheets, and stared at the ceiling of her tiny apartment. The morning light sliced through the blinds in sharp lines. Her phone said 7:42 a.m. Her shift started at 9. She thought about calling in sick. Her body ached. Her mind kept replaying that conversation in the supply closet, settle out of court, legal budget, keep your mouth shut. But she didn't call in. She never did. By 8:50, she was back at the hospital, coffee in hand, forcing a smile she didn't feel. The pediatric wing was different from the surgical floor. Brighter. Louder. The walls were painted with cartoon animals, and there was always music playing softly from somewhere, usually Disney songs or pop hits stripped of their edge. Ray liked it here. Kids didn't pretend. They cried when things hurt, laughed when things were funny, and asked questions adults were too polite to ask. It was honest. She checked the assignment board. Her morning patient was a 7-year-old named Luna Valeni, scheduled for a routine tonsillectomy at 10:30. Pre-op prep started at 9:15. Ray grabbed the chart and headed to room 407. She knocked twice, then pushed the door open with her hip. Good morning. I'm looking for a very brave kid named Luna. The words died in her throat. The little girl sitting cross-legged on the hospital bed wasn't crying or scared. She was drawing. Her tongue poked out the corner of her mouth in concentration, a fat purple crayon clutched in her hand. Around her, the bed was covered in papers, sketches of flowers, butterflies, a lopsided cat with too many whiskers. Eat. Luna looked up, grinning. She had dark curly hair pulled into 2 ponytails and a gap between her front teeth. Are you my nurse? Ray felt something loosen in her chest. I am Ray. That's a pretty name. My name is Luna. Like the moon, she held up her sketchbook. Do you like my drawings? Ray stepped closer, genuinely looking. One page showed a garden full of flowers, each petal colored in a different shade. Another had a family of rabbits wearing tiny hats. These are amazing, Ray said, and she meant it. You're really talented. Luna beamed. My dad says I'm going to be an artist when I grow up. He says I can paint the whole bakery if I want. Your dad owns a bakery? Yep. It's called Valenti's. We make the best cannoli in the city. That's what everyone says. Luna set down her crayon and looked at Ray with sudden seriousness. Are you going to be with me when I wake up? Ray crouched down so they were eye level. I'm going to be there the whole time. Before, during, and after. I promise. Luna studied her face like she was deciding whether to believe her. Then she nodded. Okay, I believe you. A man stepped into the room then, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the cafe downstairs. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples. He wore jeans and a simple black jacket. His eyes were kind but tired, the look of a parent who hadn't slept well in days. Dad.
Luna Guav.
This is Ray. She's my nurse. The man smiled, and it softened his whole face. Marco Valeni, he offered his hand, and Ray shook it. His grip was firm, but not aggressive. Thank you for taking care of my little artist. It's my job, Ray said, smiling back. But honestly, she's making it easy. Marco set one of the coffees on the bedside table and ruffled Luna's hair. She's tougher than me. I'm the one freaking out. It's a simple procedure, Ray assured him. Dr. Patel is excellent. Luna's going to do great. Marco nodded, but Ray could see the worry and the tightness around his eyes. She'd seen it 1,000 times, parents trying to be brave for their kids while quietly falling apart inside. Hey, Luna, Ray said, turning back to the little girl. How about you draw me something while I check your vitals? Something happy. Like what?
Surprise-me.
Luna's face lit up. She grabbed a fresh piece of paper and a green crayon, already lost in thought. Ray worked quickly and gently. Blood pressure, temperature, heart rate. Luna barely noticed, humming to herself as she drew. Marco watched from the corner, sipping his coffee, his shoulders gradually relaxing. You're good with her, he said quietly. Ray smiled. She's easy to be good with. When she finished, Luna held up her drawing. It was a picture of a woman with curly hair, clearly meant to be Ray, standing next to a girl with ponytails. They were holding hands. Above them, she'd drawn a big yellow sun with a smiley face. That's us, Luna said proudly. Friends. Ray felt an unexpected lump in her throat. She'd seen a lot in 8 months. Pain, fear, loss. But she'd also seen this. Kids like Luna who could find light in the scariest moments. I love it, Ray said. Can I keep it?
Luna nodded enthusiastically.
Yeah. So you remember me. I don't think I could forget you if I tried. Marco's expression softened even more. Thank you, he said, and Ray could hear the weight behind those 2 words. An hour later, Luna was in surgery. Ray stood in the OR, keeping her promise. She held Luna's small hand as the anesthesia took effect, whispering reassurances until the little girl's eyes fluttered closed. When Luna woke up in recovery, groggy and confused, Ray was right there, just like she'd promised. Luna smiled, her voice thick with sleep. You stayed. I told you I would. Luna's fingers found Ray's hand and squeezed weakly. You're my favorite. And Ray, who'd started the day exhausted and haunted by what she'd overheard, felt something shift. A reminder of why she did this job. Not for the hospital. Not for the administrators or the budgets or the politics. For Luna. For Devon. For every patient who trusted her to show up. Even when everything else felt wrong. The Courtyard Cafe was Ray's escape. It wasn't much. Just a few metal tables scattered across a concrete patio, surrounded by scraggly bushes that someone from maintenance watered once a week. But it was outside. It was air that didn't smell like disinfectant and fear. It was 20 minutes where Ray could pretend she worked somewhere normal. She sat alone at a corner table, wrapping both hands around a paper cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. Luna was stable, sleeping off the anesthesia, with her father at her bedside. Ray's next assignment wasn't for another hour. She should have gone to the break room, caught up on charting, maybe eaten something. Instead, she sat here, staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed. A text from her roommate Jennifer. Wine tonight? You look like you need it. Ray didn't remember looking like anything when she'd left the apartment that morning, but Jennifer had a gift for reading stress. She typed back, maybe. Long week. The truth was, it had only been 2 days since she'd overheard that conversation in the supply closet. 48 hours. But it felt longer, heavier, like she'd been carrying a secret that kept growing. She checked the hospital's incident reports that morning during a quiet moment. 3 post-op infections in the past 2 months. All treated, all resolved, all marked as unrelated complications. Maybe they were unrelated. Maybe Ray was connecting dots that didn't actually form a picture. Or maybe someone had erased the lines on purpose. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Ray looked up. An older woman with a hospital volunteer badge stood there, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "No, go ahead." The woman sat with a grateful sigh, setting down her own coffee. They didn't speak. The woman pulled out a paperback and started reading. Ray went back to staring at her phone, scrolling through nothing. That's when she heard the voices. 2 men, sitting at a table behind her, just out of sight. Their voices carried across the patio, casual and unconcerned. "Another 15%, one of them said. "That's what Belle wants by end of quarter." Ray's spine went rigid. 15%. The second man laughed, bitter. "Where's he expect us to cut? We're already running on fumes. Supply costs, probably. He's been leaning on vendors, renegotiating contracts. Cheaper materials, longer reuse cycles." Ray's fingers tightened around her phone. "Reuse cycles," the second man repeated slowly. "You mean surgical equipment?" "Among other things. Look, I don't make policy. I just crunch the numbers. And the numbers say we're $6 million in the red for the year. Belle's under pressure from the board. Somebody's gotta give." There was a long pause. Ray could hear one of them stirring sugar into their coffee, the spoon clinking against ceramic. "What about patient safety?" the second man asked quietly. "What about it? I'm serious, sterile. If we're cutting corners on sterilization protocols, we're not cutting corners. We're optimizing. There's a difference." "Is there?" Daryl's voice hardened. "You want to keep your job, Paul? Because I'd like to keep mine. And the way to do that is to make the numbers work and not ask questions that don't have good answers." Another pause. Longer this time. "Yeah," Paul said finally. "Yeah, okay.
Good.
Now finish your coffee. We've got a budget meeting in 10-inch. Ray heard chairs scraping, footsteps retreating. She didn't turn around. She didn't want them to see her face, didn't want to risk them remembering she'd been sitting there. The volunteer woman across from her turned a page in her book, oblivious. Ray opened her notes app. Her hands were shaking again, just like 2 nights ago. She added a new entry.
Courtyard Cafe.
2 administrators. 15% budget cut by end of quarter. Supply costs, cheaper materials, longer reuse cycles, patient safety concerns dismissed. She stared at the words. They looked so small on the screen. So insufficient. 6 million in the red. 15% cuts. Optimizing. Ray thought about Luna's gap-toothed smile. About Devin, who'd survived a car crash only to lie on an operating table surrounded by tools that maybe, just maybe, weren't as clean as they should have been. She thought about the Hippocratic oath she'd learned in nursing school. First, do no harm. But what happened when the harm was built into the system? When doing your job meant participating in something that felt wrong, even if you couldn't prove it yet. Ray finished her coffee in one long swallow, even though it was cold and bitter. She had an hour before her next patient. An hour to decide what kind of nurse she wanted to be. The kind who kept her head down, followed orders, and trusted that someone above her pay grade knew what they were doing. Or the kind who asked questions that didn't have good answers. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Jennifer. "Also, we're out of milk. Can you grab some on the way home?" Ray almost laughed. The mundane crashing into the impossible. She typed back, "Sure." Then she stood, tossed her cup in the trash, and walked back inside. She didn't have answers yet. Didn't have proof. Didn't even have a plan. But she had something else now, something that had crystallized in the past 48 hours as she'd watched and listened and tried to make sense of the pieces. She had certainty. Something was wrong at this hospital. Something bigger than mislabeled containers or overheard conversations. And Ray Cooper, 26 years old, 8 months out of school, exhausted and scared and completely out of her depth. Ray was going to figure out what it was, even if no one else wanted her to. The compliance office was on the 3rd floor, tucked between human resources and medical records like an afterthought. Ray had walked past it 100 times and never once seen anyone go in or out. Now she stood in front of the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. It had taken her 2 days to work up the courage. 2 days of double-checking her notes, rehearsing what she'd say, talking herself out of it, and then back into it. Jennifer had found her at 2 in the morning, sitting at their kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through FDA regulations on surgical instrument sterilization. "You okay?" Jennifer had asked, squinting in the light.
Yeah, just.
"Work stuff." Jennifer had studied her for a long moment, then squeezed her shoulder. "Be careful, Ray." Now, standing outside the compliance office, Ray wished she'd asked what Jennifer meant by that. She knocked.
Come in.
The office was small and aggressively beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige filing cabinets. A woman sat behind a desk cluttered with folders and coffee-stained paperwork. She was maybe 50, with reading glasses on a chain, and the expression of someone who'd heard every complaint imaginable and believed none of them. Her nameplate read, Patricia Dunmore, Compliance Director. "Can I help you?" Patricia didn't look up from her computer. "My name is Ray Cooper. I'm a nurse here. I wanted to file a formal concern." That got Patricia's attention. She looked up, her expression shifting from bored to mildly interested. "What kind of concern?" Ray stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Her mouth was dry. "I've observed some practices in the sterilization department that I think might violate safety protocols. Specifically, single-use surgical instruments being sterilized and reused." Patricia leaned back in her chair, folding her hands across her stomach. "I see. And you witnessed this personally?"
Yes.
"I delivered a container of single-use tools to sterilization 3 days ago. The label clearly stated they should be disposed of, but the technicians said they reuse them as standard practice. They said it was orders from the top." "Orders from the top," Patricia repeated, her tone neutral. "Did they specify who gave these orders?"
No.
"But I also overheard a conversation between administrators about budget cuts affecting supply costs and sterilization protocols." "You overheard a conversation?" Ray bristled at the skepticism in Patricia's voice.
Yes.
"In the Courtyard Cafe. 2 men discussing 15% budget cuts and optimizing reuse cycles." Patricia picked up a pen and pulled a blank form from a drawer. "Names?" "One was called Daryl. I don't know the other one's last name. Paul, maybe." "Daryl Friedman. He's in finance." Patricia wrote something down. "And you're concerned this connects to what exactly?" "Patient safety." Yes, Ray felt herself gaining confidence. "There have been 3 post-op infections in the past 2 months. I checked the incident reports. What if those infections are connected to contaminated instruments?" Patricia set down her pen. "Ms. Cooper, are you a trained epidemiologist?" "No, but..." "Are you familiar with hospital-acquired infection rates and their standard deviation across similar facilities?" "No, not specifically." "Then you're speculating." Patricia's voice wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. "Look, I appreciate your diligence. Truly. But correlation isn't causation. Post-op infections happen for dozens of reasons: patient immune response, environmental factors, surgical complications. Jumping to conclusions about sterilization procedures based on overheard conversations isn't helpful." Ray felt her face flush. "I'm not jumping to conclusions. I'm raising a legitimate safety concern. And I'm telling you that your concern has been noted." Patricia tapped the form she'd been writing on. "I'll submit this to the Safety Review Committee. They'll evaluate whether further investigation is warranted." "When will that happen?" "These things take time." We have protocols, Patricia offered a thin smile. In the meantime, I'd suggest focusing on your assigned duties. Leave compliance issues to the compliance department. That's what we're here for. Ray stared at her. That's it. What were you expecting? I don't know. An actual investigation? Someone taking this seriously? Patricia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. Ms. Cooper, I've been in compliance for 17 years. I've seen nurses, doctors, technicians, all convinced they'd uncovered some massive conspiracy because a supply closet was disorganized or a form was filled out wrong. Do you know how many of those concerns turned out to be legitimate problems? Ray said nothing. About 3%, Patricia stood, signaling the conversation was over. I'm not dismissing you. I'm telling you that we have systems in place.
Trust those systems.
Trust that the people running this hospital know what they're doing. And if they don't, the question hung in the air between them. Patricia walked to the door and opened it. Then that's above both our pay grades. Have a good day, Ms. Cooper. Ray walked out in a daze. The hallway felt too bright, too loud. A group of residents hurried past, laughing about something. An orderly pushed a wheelchair. Everything looked normal. But nothing felt normal. She'd done the right thing. She'd followed protocol, filed a formal complaint, gone through proper channels. And she'd been patted on the head and sent away like a child who'd seen a monster under the bed. Ray pulled out her phone and opened her notes. She added one more line. Compliance Office, Patricia Dunmore. Concern filed. Dismissed as speculation. Trust the system. She stood there for a moment, staring at those words. Then she deleted the last sentence and wrote something else. The system doesn't want to know. The text came on Friday afternoon, just as Ray was finishing her shift. Unknown number, Ms. Cooper, this is Dr. Bell's office. He'd like to speak with you briefly. Would 5:30 work? Rooftop garden. Ray stared at the message, her stomach dropping. Dr. Richard Bell, the CEO. The man whose name kept appearing in her notes like a shadow she couldn't quite see. She typed back, Sure, I'll be there. Her hands were shaking. The rooftop garden was something the hospital advertised in brochures, a healing space for patients and staff. In reality, it was a collection of potted plants and wooden benches arranged around a small fountain that only worked half the time. But the view was good. From up here, you could see the whole city stretching out toward the horizon, the late afternoon sun turning the buildings gold. Ray arrived at 5:28. Dr. Bell was already there, standing at the railing with his hands in his pockets, looking out over the skyline. He wore charcoal slacks and a crisp white shirt, no tie. His silver hair caught the light. He looked like he belonged on a magazine cover, Healthcare's Brightest Minds or Leaders Who Care. Ms. Cooper, he turned as she approached, offering a warm smile. Thank you for meeting me. I know you've had a long week. It's fine, Ray's voice came out steadier than she felt. Please sit, he gestured to one of the benches. Ray sat. Dr. Bell settled beside her. Not too close, perfectly calibrated to seem friendly, without being invasive. Beautiful evening, he said, looking back at the skyline. Sometimes I forget to come up here. Too much time in meetings, not enough time remembering why we do this work. Ray didn't respond. She waited. Dr. Bell let the silence stretch for a moment, then turned to her with that same gentle smile. I heard you visited our compliance office earlier this week. There it was. I filed a concern, Ray said carefully. Standard protocol. Of course. And I'm glad you did. It shows you care about patient safety. That's exactly the kind of mindfulness we want in our staff. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, completely at ease. Patricia Dunmore forwarded your report to me. I wanted to address it personally. You didn't need to. But I wanted to. His tone was earnest, almost paternal. Ray, may I call you Ray? She nodded. Ray, you've been with us for 8 months now. Your performance reviews have been excellent. Patients love you. Your colleagues respect you. You have a real future here. The compliments felt like a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. I appreciate that, Ray said. So, I want to be transparent with you. Dr. Bell shifted slightly, his expression growing more serious. The concerns you raised about sterilization protocols, I understand where they're coming from. Budget discussions can sound alarming when taken out of context. But I want to assure you, every decision we make is vetted by multiple departments. Legal, medical, compliance. We have protocols on top of protocols. The technicians said single-use instruments are being reused, Ray said quietly. That's not out of context. That's what they told me. And they were explaining a complex process in simple terms. Dr. Bell's voice remained patient, like he was teaching. Single-use doesn't always mean what it sounds like. Some instruments are rated for limited reuse under specific sterilization conditions. It's all within FDA guidelines. We have documentation. Can I see it? The question came out before Ray could stop herself. Dr. Bell's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in his eyes. So brief, she almost missed it. Of course. I'll have someone from Medical Affairs send you the relevant policies. Though I'll warn you, it's pretty dry reading. He stood, walking back to the railing. The wind picked up, ruffling his hair. He looked out at the city like a captain surveying his ship. Ray, I'm going to be honest with you. Running a hospital is like juggling chainsaws while walking a tightrope. Every decision is a compromise between ideal care and practical reality. We'd all love unlimited budgets, brand new equipment for every procedure, staff ratios that let nurses work 40-hour weeks. He turned back to her. But that's not the world we live in. I understand that, Ray said. But patient safety shouldn't be the compromise. And it's not. His voice was firm now, still kind, but with an edge beneath it. That's what I'm trying to help you understand. We don't compromise on safety. We optimize. We find smarter ways to do more with less. That's not criminal. That's survival. Ray felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. I worry, Dr. Bell continued, softer now, that you're overthinking this. Looking for problems that don't exist because you're tired, stressed. This job takes a toll. Burnout is real. I'm not burned out. Maybe not yet, he smiled again, that warm, concerned smile. But I've seen it happen to good nurses. They start seeing shadows everywhere. They stop trusting their colleagues, their leadership. It's a spiral. He walked back to the bench, standing in front of her now. Take the weekend.
Rest.
Come back Monday, with fresh eyes. And trust that the people running this hospital, people who've been doing this for decades, know what they're doing. Ray looked up at him. The sun was setting behind him, turning him into a silhouette.
Trust leadership, he said gently.
That's how good teams work. Then he patted her shoulder, that same gentle, firm touch, and walked away. Ray sat alone on the rooftop as the sky turned purple, the city lights beginning to flicker on below. She'd been warned.
Kindly, professionally, perfectly.
But warned nonetheless. Ray spent the weekend in her apartment, staring at her laptop and not typing anything. Jennifer tried to coax her out for brunch. Ray said she was tired. Jennifer suggested a movie. Ray said she had errands. By Sunday evening, Jennifer stopped asking and just left a pint of ice cream outside Ray's bedroom door with a sticky note. Here if you need me. Ray ate the ice cream and read FDA guidelines until her eyes blurred. Monday morning came too fast. She walked into the hospital at 8:45 a.m. with her badge clipped to scrubs that still smelled like detergent. Her assignment was posted. Pediatric recovery, rooms 401 to 408. Light duty. Routine checks. She was grateful for routine. Room 407 was Luna Valeni. Ray checked the chart. Post-op day 3. Recovering well. Scheduled for discharge that afternoon. She knocked twice and pushed the door open. Ray. Luna was sitting up in bed, coloring again. The bedside table was covered with more drawings, along with a vase of flowers and what looked like half a dozen stuffed animals. Hey, superstar, Ray smiled, and it felt like the first real smile she'd managed in days. How are you feeling? Good. My throat doesn't hurt anymore. Well, it hurts a little. But Dad says I get ice cream for a whole week. That's the best medicine. Ray checked Luna's vitals. Temperature normal, heart rate steady. Looks like you're ready to go home. Finally, Luna bounced slightly, then winced.
Ow.
Okay, maybe I'm not completely ready. Easy, tiger. Give it a few more days. Ray adjusted Luna's pillow. Where's your dad? He went to get breakfast. He said hospital food is. Luna lowered her voice dramatically. Not fit for human consumption. Ray laughed. He's not wrong. The door opened and Marco walked in, carrying a paper bag that smelled like fresh bread and coffee. He stopped when he saw Ray, his face lighting up. Ray. Perfect timing, he set the bag down and reached into his jacket pocket. I've been wanting to catch you. He pulled out a white bakery box tied with string. What's this? Ray asked. Thank you, Marco handed it to her. You took care of my daughter. You kept your promise. That means everything. Ray opened the box. Inside were 6 perfect cannoli, dusted with powdered sugar, the shells golden and crisp. Mr. Valenti, you didn't have to.
Marco.
Please, he smiled. And yes, I did. You went above and beyond. Luna told me you held her hand in the oar. You stayed with her when she woke up. That's not just doing your job. That's caring. Ray felt her throat tighten. She's a special kid. She is. Marco glanced at Luna, who was showing off her latest drawing to a stuffed elephant. She's everything to me. Her mother passed when she was 3. Cancer. So it's just us now, his voice softened. I don't take it lightly when someone treats her with real kindness.
I'm so sorry, Ray said.
About your wife. Thank you. Marco's expression was sad but steady, like someone who'd learned to carry grief without letting it crush him. It's been 4 years. We manage. We have good days. He looked back at Ray. This was a good day because of you. Ray didn't know what to say. She clutched the bakery box, feeling the weight of his gratitude like something physical. The cannoli are from the bakery, Marco continued. Family recipe. My grandfather brought it from Sicily in 1952. If you don't like them, lie to me and say you do. Ray laughed, surprised by the sound. I'm sure they're amazing. They are, Luna called from the bed. Dad's cannoli are famous. People come from 3 towns over. Luna's my marketing department, Marco said, grinning. They talked for a few more minutes. Easy conversation about the bakery, about Luna's drawings, about recovery instructions. Marco listened carefully when Ray explained the follow-up appointment schedule, asking questions that showed he was actually paying attention. He was different from a lot of parents Ray had worked with. Not hovering or anxious, but present. Grounded. There was a calmness to him, a quiet strength that made her feel like Luna was in good hands. Before Ray left, Luna grabbed her hand. Will you come visit us at the bakery sometime? Maybe, Ray said, squeezing her fingers gently. If I'm in the neighborhood. We're on Riverside, Marco said. Corner of 5th and Maple.
Stop by anytime.
Coffee's always free for friends.
Friends.
The word sat warm in Ray's chest. She left room 407 feeling lighter than she had in days. The cannoli box sat in her locker during the rest of her shift, and when she opened it during her break, the first bite nearly made her cry. Crispy shell, sweet ricotta, a hint of orange and chocolate. It tasted like someone's grandmother had poured love into a pastry. She ate 2 and saved the rest for Jennifer. That evening, walking to her car in the parking garage, Ray thought about Marco's words. You went above and beyond. That's not just doing your job. That's caring. Maybe that's all this was supposed to be. Caring for patients. Keeping promises. Making small differences in individual lives. Maybe she didn't need to save the whole hospital. Maybe Dr. Bell was right. She was overthinking, seeing problems that weren't really there. Maybe. But when she got home and opened her laptop, the FDA guidelines were still bookmarked. Her notes were still saved. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered, something is still wrong. Raiden planned to go to Riverside Park. She just ended up there. It was Wednesday afternoon, her late shift didn't start until 4, and her apartment felt too small, Too quiet. Jennifer was at work. The dishes were done. Ray had reorganized her closet twice and still had 3 hours to kill. So she drove. Riverside Park was a narrow strip of green along the water, more of a walking path than an actual park. There were benches overlooking the river, a few trees, joggers in bright athletic gear moving past like migratory birds. The sky was overcast, threatening rain but not delivering. Ray bought a coffee from a food truck and found an empty bench. She sat, watching the water move, trying not to think about the hospital. She'd kept her head down for the past 2 days. Smiled at her colleagues, charted her patients, asked no questions. Patricia from compliance had sent her an email with 17 attached PDFs titled Sterilization Protocols and Compliance Standards. Ray had opened exactly none of them. Trust leadership. That's how good teams work. Dr. Bell's voice in her head, smooth as glass. Ray. She turned. Marco Valeni stood a few feet away, wearing jeans and a gray Henley, holding a paper cup. He looked surprised but pleased.
Marco.
Hi, Ray stood awkwardly, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. I didn't know you came here. Every Wednesday around 2. He gestured to the bench. Mind if I sit? No, of course not. They sat, the river stretching out in front of them. A duck paddled past, looking vaguely annoyed by the weather. How's Luna? Ray asked. Back to normal. Drawing everything in sight, complaining that ice cream for breakfast isn't actually a long-term nutritional plan, Marco smiled. She asked about you yesterday. Wanted to know if you'd come by the bakery yet. I've been meaning to. Work's been. Ray trailed off. Busy. Something like that. Marco sipped his coffee, not pushing. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. It was strange. Ray barely knew this man, but something about his presence felt steady, undemanding. Like he was someone who knew how to just exist without needing to fill every silence with words. Can I ask you something? Marco said finally. Sure. That day at the hospital, when you were checking Luna before surgery, you looked tired. Not just physically. Like something was weighing on you. He turned to her. You still have that look. Ray's first instinct was to deflect, to smile and say everything was fine. But maybe it was the gray sky, or the fact that Marco was essentially a stranger, or the exhaustion of pretending for the past week. I'm having some trouble at work, she said quietly. What kind of trouble? Ray hesitated. This was dangerous territory, talking to a patient's family member about internal hospital issues. But Marco wasn't just a patient's family member anymore.
He was. What?
An acquaintance? Someone who'd given her cannoli and called her a friend. I think there might be some safety issues, she said carefully, with how the hospital handles certain procedures. I tried to report it through the proper channels, but nobody wants to hear it.
Marco nodded slowly.
You're worried about patients. Yeah. And they told you to stay quiet. Not in those words. But basically, Ray stared at the river. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Everyone keeps telling me to trust the system, that the people in charge know what they're doing. Do you believe that? The question was simple, direct. No judgment in it, just curiosity. I don't know, Ray admitted. I want to. It would be easier. Marco was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. My father used to say something when I was a kid. He'd say, Marco, sometimes the people in charge are good people making hard choices. And sometimes they're just people who learned how to look like they're in charge. Ray turned to look at him. How do you tell the difference? You watch what they do when they think nobody's looking. Marco met her eyes. You listen to your gut. And you don't let anyone talk you out of what you know is true. Something in his tone made Ray pause. There was a weight behind his words, like he was speaking from experience, not just giving advice, but sharing something he'd learned the hard way. What do you do? Ray asked. For work, I mean, besides the bakery. Marco smiled slightly. I'm in management. Family business. Logistics, mostly. That sounds vague. It is. He didn't elaborate and Ray didn't push. They sat there as the first drops of rain started to fall, light, sporadic. Neither of them moved. If you need someone to talk to, Marco said, someone who's not involved in your workplace politics, I'm here. No judgment, no advice unless you want it. Just an ear. Ray felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. And if you need anything else. Marco paused, choosing his words carefully. I know people. In the city. If you ever feel unsafe or pressured, you tell me. Okay. There was something protective in his voice, almost paternal. It reminded Ray of her own father, who'd passed when she was in college. Okay, she said. The rain picked up. Marco stood, offering his hand to help her up. Come on. Let's get out of this before we drown. They walked back toward the parking lot together, not talking, just two people sharing an umbrella that Marco pulled from his jacket. When they parted ways, Marco touched her shoulder gently. Take care of yourself, Ray. Not just everyone else. She watched him walk to his car, a black sedan, simple and clean. Then she got in her own car and sat there for a moment, replaying the conversation. You don't let anyone talk you out of what you know is true. Ray pulled out her phone and opened her notes. She hadn't written anything new in days. Now she typed, Marco Valeni, good man, told me to trust my gut. Then she started the car and drove to work. The locker room was empty when Ray arrived for her shift. She changed into her scrubs, tied her hair back, and was reaching for her badge when she heard voices in the hallway just outside. Swear to God, that's him. You're paranoid. I'm telling you.
Marco Valenti.
I saw him in the lobby yesterday. Ray froze, her hand on her locker door. Who's Marco Valeni? A third voice asked. Younger, probably a new hire. There was a pause. Then the first voice, lower now. You really don't know? Should I? He's connected. Like, connected. Ray's stomach dropped. What, like mafia? The younger voice laughed nervously. I don't know if I'd say mafia exactly. But his family, the Valentis, they've been in the city for like 100 years. They run half the businesses on the east side. And I'm not talking bakeries, even though that's what they tell people. Come on, that's just rumors. My cousin's a cop. He says the Valeni name comes up in investigations all the time. Nothing ever sticks, but everyone knows. Protection rackets, gambling, loan sharking. Old school stuff. Ray's heart hammered in her chest. She stood perfectly still, barely breathing. So why's he at the hospital? The younger voice asked. His daughter had surgery last week. Luna, I think. Sweet kid. But yeah, Marco Valeni walks into a room, people notice. People don't cross him. Has he ever, hurt anyone? I don't know specifics. But the stories, the first voice dropped even lower. Let's just say you don't build that kind of reputation by asking nicely. Footsteps moved away down the hall. The voices faded. Ray stood alone in the locker room, her reflection staring back at her from the small mirror inside her locker door. Her face was pale.
Marco Valenti.
The man who'd given her cannoli, who'd thanked her for taking care of his daughter, who'd sat with her on a park bench and told her to trust her gut. People don't cross him. She thought about his calm demeanor, the way he'd offered help so casually. If you ever feel unsafe or pressured, you tell me. At the time, it had felt protective, fatherly. Now it felt different. Ray closed her locker and walked out of the room in a daze. Her shift passed in a blur, vitals checks, medication rounds, a diabetic patient who needed insulin adjustments. She moved through it all on autopilot, her mind somewhere else entirely. During her break, she pulled out her phone and searched Marco Valeni. The results were sparse. A few mentions in local business articles about Valeni's bakery, family-owned since 1952. A photo from a charity event 3 years ago, Marco in a suit, shaking hands with the mayor, both of them smiling. Nothing about crime. Nothing about the mafia. But then there wouldn't be, would there? That's not how it worked. People like that, if the rumors were true, they stayed out of the spotlight. They looked legitimate. They donated to charity and shook hands with mayors and ran bakeries that made the best cannoli in the city. Ray closed the browser and sat there, staring at her phone. She thought about the way Marco had looked at Luna. Pure love, pure devotion. She thought about how gentle he'd been, how respectful, how he'd asked about her life, listened without judgment. Was that real? Or was she just seeing what he wanted her to see? My father used to say something when I was a kid. Had his father been in the same business? Was Luna being raised in that world? Ray felt sick. But underneath the fear and confusion, something else stirred. A memory of Marco's words in the park. Sometimes the people in charge are just people who learned how to look like they're in charge. He hadn't been talking about himself. He'd been talking about the hospital, about Dr. Bell. And he'd told her to trust her gut. Ray opened her notes app. She scrolled past all her entries about sterilization protocols and overheard conversations and budget cuts. Then she added a new one. Marco Valenti. Rumors say he's connected to organized crime. Don't know if it's true, but he's been nothing but kind and respectful to me. He told me to trust my instincts. He offered help if I ever felt unsafe. She stared at the words. The truth was, she didn't know Marco Valenti. Not really. She knew he loved his daughter. She knew he made good cannoli. She knew he'd sat with her in the rain and offered her kindness when she needed it. Everything else was rumors and speculation. Just like her concerns about the hospital had been dismissed as speculation. Ray closed the app and went back to work. That evening, as she was leaving, she passed the lobby and saw a man in a dark suit talking quietly on his phone near the entrance. He wasn't Marco, but something about his posture, watchful, alert, made her think of what she'd overheard. People don't cross him. She walked to her car, her keys clutched tight in her hand. When she got home, Jennifer was on the couch watching reality TV. Hey, you look like you've seen a ghost. Long day, Ray said. There's leftover pizza in the fridge. Thanks. Ray went to her room and closed the door. She sat on her bed, still in her scrubs, and pulled out her phone one more time. She looked at Marco's contact information. He'd given it to her before they'd parted at the park, just in case she needed anything. Her thumb hovered over the delete button. Then she lowered the phone and set it on her nightstand. She didn't delete it. She didn't know what Marco Valenti was. But she knew what he wasn't. He wasn't Dr. Bell. And right now, that was enough. Ray didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The rumors, the warnings, Marco's kindness. By the time the sun came up, she'd made a decision. She sent a text at 7:15 a.m. Marco, it's Ray. Can we meet? I need to talk to you about something. The response came 2 minutes later. Of course. When and where?
Café Marcella. 10 Uhr morgens.
I'll be there. Café Marcella was neutral ground, a small Italian coffee shop on the north side, far from the hospital, far from Valenti's bakery. Public enough to be safe, quiet enough to talk. Ray arrived first. She ordered an espresso she didn't drink and sat at a corner table, her hands clasped tight around the tiny cup. Marco walked in at 9:58, scanning the room briefly before spotting her. He wore jeans and a simple navy jacket, looking more like a suburban dad than whatever the rumors said he was. When he reached the table, his expression was concerned.
Ray.
You okay? Sit, please. He sat, ordering nothing, his full attention on her. Ray took a breath. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. The rumors about you, about your family, she met his eyes. Are they true? Marco didn't flinch. He didn't look away or deflect. He just held her gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Yes, he said quietly. Some of them. Ray's heart hammered. Which ones? My family has been in this city for a long time. We started with the bakery. That part's true. My grandfather really did bring the recipe from Sicily. But we also built other businesses. Some legitimate.
Some he paused.
Less so. Organized crime. That's a broad term. But yes, parts of what my family does exist in gray areas. Or darker than gray. His voice was steady, matter of fact. Not proud, not ashamed. Just honest. I inherited a complicated legacy. I've spent the last 10 years trying to make it cleaner, more legitimate. But I can't erase the past. Ray's hands trembled slightly. Have you hurt people? I've protected my family. I've made difficult choices. Marco's eyes never left hers. I'm not going to pretend I'm a saint, Ray. But I've never hurt anyone who didn't come at me or mine first. And I've never hurt anyone innocent. The words hung between them. Why are you telling me this? Ray asked. You could have lied. Because you asked for honesty. And because if you're thinking of asking me for help, which I assume is why we're here, you deserve to know who I am. Ray felt exposed, seen through. She took a shaky breath. I need help, she said. But not the kind you might think. Marco leaned forward slightly. Tell me. And so she did. Everything. The single-use instruments. The overheard conversations. The budget cuts. Patricia Dunmore brushing her off. Dr. Bell's warning on the rooftop, wrapped in kindness and threat. I went through the proper channels, Ray said. I did everything right. But no one wants to hear it. They've made it clear that if I keep pushing, I'll lose my job. Or worse. Worse how? I don't know. But Dr. Bell made me feel like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't see. Like one more step and I'd fall. Marco's jaw tightened. You think he'd retaliate? I think he'd make me disappear. Not literally, just professionally. I'd be blacklisted. No hospital would hire me. My career would be over before it started, Ray's voice cracked. But I can't let this go. Every time I close my eyes, I see Luna on that operating table. I see Devin in recovery. I see all the patients who trust us to keep them safe, and I know, something's wrong. What do you need from me? Ray looked at him directly. Protection. Not violence. Not threats. Just. I need someone watching my back while I gather real evidence. Enough that the state health department can't ignore it. Enough that Dr. Bell can't bury it. You want to do this legally? Yes. Completely. I'm not asking you to intimidate anyone or break any laws. I just need to know that while I'm doing this, documenting everything, building a case, I won't be harassed, fired, or silenced before I can finish. Marco studied her for a long moment. You understand what you're asking? If I'm involved, even just as protection, and this goes public, your evidence could be questioned. People will say you worked with someone connected to organized crime. It could undermine everything. I know. But I'm out of options. The system won't protect me. So I'm asking you, will you? The cafe hummed around them. Someone laughed at the counter. The espresso machine hissed. Marco leaned back in his chair. I have one condition. What? You stay safe. That means if at any point this gets dangerous, if Belle or anyone else threatens you directly, you walk away. You don't play hero. You tell me and we handle it differently. I'm not asking you to. I know what you're asking. And I'm telling you my terms. Your safety is non-negotiable. Ray swallowed hard. Okay. Then I'll help you. Marco's voice was quiet but absolute. You do this the right way. Gather your evidence, build your case. I'll make sure no one interferes. No one touches you, no one fires you. No one makes you disappear. How? You don't need to know how. You just need to trust that it'll happen. Ray felt tears prick her eyes. Why? Why would you do this for me? Marco's expression softened. Because you kept your promise to my daughter. Because you're trying to do the right thing in a system that punishes people for caring. And because he paused. Because I've spent a lot of my life in the gray areas. Maybe it's time I help someone stay in the light. Ray reached across the table. Marco took her hand, his grip warm and solid. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. Just be careful. They sat there for another moment, two people from completely different worlds, bound together by a 7-year-old girl with a gap-toothed smile and a promise that had to be kept. Then Ray stood, steadier than she'd felt in weeks. It was time to get to work. It took Ray 4 days to build a plan. She couldn't just walk into the supply records room and start photographing documents. That would trigger alarms, both literal and metaphorical. She needed to be smart, methodical, invisible. So she became a ghost. She volunteered for extra shifts, late nights, early mornings, the times when fewer people were around. She offered to help with inventory checks, to file paperwork, to cover for colleagues who wanted to leave early. Nobody questioned it. Eager nurses were a hospital's dream. Marco kept his distance, but Ray felt his presence like a safety net she couldn't see. Once, she'd worked until midnight and found her car in the parking garage with a fresh coffee sitting on the hood, still warm. No note.
Just coffee.
Another time, a senior administrator had cornered her near the elevators, asking pointed questions about her compliance complaint. Before Ray could answer, another man, someone she'd never seen before, wearing a maintenance uniform, had interrupted to say there was a water leak that needed immediate attention. The administrator had left, frustrated. The maintenance man had nodded at Ray once, then disappeared. Protection without interference. Exactly what she'd asked for. Now, on a Tuesday night during a skeleton crew shift, Ray stood outside the supply records room with her badge and a legitimate excuse. She'd been assigned to verify a discrepancy in surgical kit inventory for OR3, the same OR where she'd first noticed the single-use instruments. The night supervisor had handed her the task with barely a glance, too busy dealing with an emergency admission to care about paperwork. Ray swiped her badge. The door clicked open. The records room was small and cramped, lined with filing cabinets and shelves packed with binders. A single computer terminal sat on a desk in the corner, its screen dark. She closed the door behind her and got to work. The filing system was alphabetical by department. She found sterilization, central supply, and pulled the binder for the past 6 months. Inside were logs, dates, times, equipment processed, sterilization cycles, technician signatures. Ray pulled out her phone and started photographing pages. The dates when single-use instruments had been logged. The cycle numbers. The technician notes that said, reprocess per protocol revision 3-18. Protocol revision 3-18. That was new. She searched the shelves and found a thin binder labeled Protocol Revisions, 2024 to 2025. Inside, buried on page 47, was Revision 3-18. Single-use surgical instruments may be reprocessed under Extended Sterilization Cycles, ESC, when replacement inventory is unavailable due to supply chain delays or budget constraints. Maximum reuse, 3 cycles. Approval required from medical director. Ray's hands shook as she photographed it. This wasn't FDA guidelines. This was the hospital making up its own rules. She kept digging. Pulled incident reports next, the 3 post-op infections she'd noticed weeks ago. Each file had been marked resolved, with notes attributing infections to patient comorbidities, not equipment contamination. But the dates aligned. 2 weeks after high-volume reprocessing periods, infection rate spiked. Ray photographed everything. Next was the electronic system. She logged into the terminal using her credentials. Nurses had access to supply ordering records for shift management. She navigated to the purchasing database and searched for surgical instrument orders over the past year. The numbers told the story. Orders had dropped by 40% starting in March. But surgical volume had stayed the same. Less equipment. Same number of surgeries, which meant reusing what they had. She downloaded the spreadsheet onto a flash drive she'd brought from home. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marco. Everything okay? She typed back quickly. Yes. Almost done. Don't rush. Careful is better than fast. Ray pocketed her phone and moved to the last piece. Pharmacy storage records. If contaminated instruments were causing infections, there would be a spike in antibiotic prescriptions for post-surgical patients. She found the pharmacy logs in a separate cabinet. It took 15 minutes of cross-referencing, but there it was, a 28% increase in post-op antibiotic prescriptions starting in April, right after the budget cuts kicked in. She photographed the summary page. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Ray's heart stopped. She shoved the binder back onto the shelf, killed the computer screen, and grabbed the OR3 inventory sheet she was supposed to be verifying, her cover story. The footsteps paused outside the door. Ray held her breath. Then they continued past, fading down the hallway. She waited 30 seconds. Then she carefully put everything back exactly where she'd found it, double-checked that nothing looked disturbed, and slipped out of the room. The hallway was empty. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m. Ray walked to the nearest bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and let out a shaky breath. Her hands were trembling. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photos, dozens of them, clear and damning. She had it. The evidence trail. Documentation showing the hospital was reusing single-use instruments, that budget cuts had forced the practice, that infection rates had increased as a result. It wasn't just speculation anymore. It was proof. She texted Marco, "I got it." His response was immediate. "Good. Go home. Rest. Tomorrow we figure out the next step." Ray drove home in silence, the flash drive in her pocket feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. When she walked into her apartment, Jennifer was asleep on the couch, the TV playing some late-night infomercial. Ray covered her with a blanket, then went to her room. She sat on her bed and opened her laptop. She backed up all the photos to 3 different places: cloud storage, an external hard drive, a second flash drive she buried in her sock drawer. Then she lay down, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. She'd crossed a line tonight. There was no going back. But for the first time in weeks, Ray felt something she hadn't felt since this whole thing started. Hope. She had the truth. Now she just needed to make sure the right people heard it. The Federal Health Inspection team arrived on a Thursday morning, unannounced. Ray was checking vitals in the pediatric wing when she heard the commotion, urgent whispers, administrators speed-walking past with panicked expressions, someone from legal rushing toward the elevators. She pulled out her phone. A text from Marco. "They're here. Stay calm. Do your job. If anyone asks you anything, tell the truth." Ray's heart raced. She'd submitted an anonymous tip to the state health department 3 days ago, along with copies of every piece of evidence she'd gathered. The email had been sent from a library computer, routed through an encrypted service Marco's tech person had set up. She hadn't expected them to act so fast. By noon, the entire hospital was in chaos. Inspectors in official badges moved through departments with clipboards and cameras. The sterilization unit had been shut down. Someone from the CDC was reportedly examining infection control protocols. Dr. Bell's office had gone dark, blinds drawn, door closed. Ray kept her head down, focusing on her patients. A boy with a broken arm who wanted to hear stories about her nursing school disasters. An elderly woman recovering from hip surgery who needed help adjusting her pillows. Normal work. Grounding work. At 2:30 p.m., her supervisor found her. "Ray, you're needed in conference room B. Now." "What for?" "Federal investigators want to talk to you." Ray's mouth went dry. "Why me?" Her supervisor shrugged, but her eyes said, "You know why." Conference room B was on the administrative floor. When Ray walked in, she found 4 people waiting. 3 investigators in business casual, and Dr. Bell, sitting at the head of the table with his hands folded, his expression calm, but his eyes cold. One of the investigators, a woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes, gestured to an empty chair. "Ms. Cooper, thank you for joining us. I'm Agent Reyes, Office of Inspector General. We have some questions about hospital sterilization practices." Ray sat. Her hands were sweating. She clasped them in her lap. "Of course. Happy to help." Agent Reyes opened a folder. We received documentation suggesting that single-use surgical instruments have been systematically reused at this facility. Are you familiar with this practice? Ray felt Dr. Bell's eyes on her. She could feel the weight of his presence, the unspoken threat. But then she remembered Marco's words, "Your safety is non-negotiable." And Luna's drawing, still taped to her locker. "My guardian nurse." "Yes," Ray said clearly. "I am." Dr. Bell shifted in his seat. "Can you elaborate?" Agent Reyes asked. Ray took a breath. "About 6 weeks ago, I delivered a container of surgical instruments to the sterilization department. They were labeled as single-use, meant for disposal. But the technicians told me they reprocessed them as standard practice. They said it was orders from the top. Did you report this?"
Yes.
"I filed a formal concern with the compliance office. I met with Patricia Dunmore. She told me I was speculating and that I should trust the system." Agent Reyes made a note. "Did you pursue it further?" "I tried to. I spoke with..." Ray glanced at Dr. Bell. "With hospital leadership. I was told I was overthinking things, that I should focus on my assigned duties." "Miss Cooper," Dr. Bell interjected smoothly, "I think you're mischaracterizing our conversation." "Am I?" Ray turned to him. "You took me to the rooftop garden. You told me budget discussions can sound alarming out of context. You told me to trust leadership and stop looking for problems that don't exist. You made it very clear that if I kept pushing, there would be consequences." The room went silent. Agent Reyes looked at Dr. Bell. "Is that accurate?" "I had a mentorship conversation with a junior staff member who seemed stressed," Dr. Bell said calmly. "I advised her to trust in the hospital's protocols and not let burnout lead to unfounded concerns." "They're not unfounded," Ray said, her voice stronger now. "I have documentation. Sterilization logs showing reprocessing cycles. Protocol Revision 3 to 18, which explicitly allows reuse of single-use instruments. Purchasing records showing a 40% drop in equipment orders. Pharmacy records showing increased antibiotic prescriptions for post-op infections." Agent Reyes's eyebrows rose. "You have this documentation?" "I can provide it." Dr. Bell's mask slipped for just a second, a flash of anger, quickly suppressed. "Ms. Cooper, accessing those records without authorization is a serious violation." "I had authorization. I was assigned inventory verification tasks. Everything I accessed was within my job duties." The door opened. Marco Valeni walked in. He wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored. His presence filled the room instantly. Behind him, a man in an equally expensive suit carried a briefcase, a lawyer, clearly. Dr. Bell stood. "Excuse me, this is a closed meeting. My name is Marco Valeni. I'm here as a concerned parent whose daughter underwent surgery at this facility." His voice was calm, measured. "And as someone who believes Ms. Cooper's concerns deserve to be heard without intimidation." Agent Reyes studied him. "Mr. Valenti, we appreciate your concern, but..." "My daughter's life was in your hands," Marco said, looking at Dr. Bell. "If there's even a chance that cost-cutting measures put her at risk, I have every right to be here." The lawyer set his briefcase on the table. "We're also prepared to provide supporting documentation and expert testimony if needed." Dr. Bell's jaw tightened. "This is highly irregular." "So is reusing single-use surgical equipment," Marco said quietly. Agent Reyes looked between them, then back at Ray. "Ms. Cooper, you said you can provide documentation?" "Yes." "Then we'd like to see it. All of it." Ray pulled out the flash drive she'd been carrying in her pocket for 3 days. She placed it on the table. "Everything's here. Logs, protocols, purchasing records, infection rates. Cross-referenced and dated." Agent Reyes took the drive. She looked at Dr. Bell. "We'll need full access to your sterilization department, all related protocols, and financial records for the past year." "Of course," Dr. Bell said, but his voice had lost its warmth. "We have nothing to hide." But he was lying, and everyone in the room knew it. 3 months later, the hospital courtyard looked different. The scraggly bushes had been replaced with flowering plants. Someone had pressure-washed the concrete. There were new benches, and the cafe had expanded its menu. It was like the hospital was trying to scrub itself clean from the inside out. Ray stood near the fountain, which actually worked now, watching a press conference on her phone. Dr. Richard Bell's resignation was being announced by the board chairman, framed as a mutual decision and a transition toward new leadership priorities. No mention of the federal investigation. No mention of the violations found in the sterilization department, or the quiet settlement with 3 families whose loved ones had suffered infections. No mention of Protocol Revision 3 to 18, which had been immediately rescinded. Just corporate language and polished smiles. But Ray knew the truth. The whole city knew the truth, even if the official statements never said it out loud. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Saw the news. Drinks tonight to celebrate. Ray smiled and typed back. Maybe. I have something at 4. She pocketed her phone and walked back inside. Her new assignment was waiting. The hospital's safety standards committee met in a conference room that smelled like fresh paint and new carpet. Ray took her seat at the table alongside 2 doctors, a senior nurse, an infection control specialist, and the interim CEO, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Patricia Okafor, who'd made it clear from day one that transparency was non-negotiable. All right, Dr. Okafor said, opening her laptop. Let's review the revised protocols. Ray, you had concerns about the equipment disposal language. Ray pulled up her notes. Over the past month, she'd been asked to help rewrite the hospital's safety standards. Her, a 26-year-old nurse barely a year out of school, sitting at a table with people who had decades more experience. But she was here because she'd asked the questions no one else would ask. The language says, when appropriate, Ray said, pointing to the screen. I think we need to define what appropriate means. Otherwise, it's too vague. Someone could interpret it the same way Revision 3 to 18 was interpreted. Dr. Okafor nodded. Agreed. Let's make it explicit. Single use means single use. No exceptions without written approval from both medical director and infection control. And documented justification, the infection control specialist added. If there's a genuine supply chain emergency, we need a paper trail. They worked for 2 hours, line by line, making sure every protocol had teeth. Making sure what happened under Dr. Bell's administration couldn't happen again. When the meeting ended, Dr. Okafor caught Ray at the door. You did good work today. You're doing good work, period. Thank you. I mean it. This hospital needed someone willing to speak up. It cost you something, I know, but it mattered. Ray felt her throat tighten. I just wanted patients to be safe. That's exactly why you're the right person for this, Dr. Okafor squeezed her shoulder. Keep that compass. Don't let this place dull it. Ray left the hospital at 5:30 and drove across the city. The address Marco had texted her led to a neighborhood she didn't know well, residential streets with old trees and corner stores, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors. She parked in front of a newly renovated building. The sign above the door read, Luna's Light Community Clinic. Marco stood on the front steps, talking with a contractor. When he saw Ray, he smiled and waved her over. Right on time, he said. Come on, I'll give you the tour. Inside, the clinic was bright and open. Exam rooms lined one hallway. There was a waiting area with comfortable chairs and toys for kids. A small pharmacy. Everything brand new. Everything clean. We open next month, Marco said. Fully funded for the first 3 years. Completely transparent financials. I've got a board of community members overseeing everything. No insurance required. If you can pay, you pay. If you can't, you don't. Ray walked through slowly, taking it in. This is incredible. Luna wanted to name it. She said you were like a light in a dark place, so he gestured around. Luna's light. Ray's eyes stung. Marco, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. You helped design the patient care model. This is as much yours as it is mine, he handed her a folder. Which brings me to this. I'd like you to consult on our staffing protocols. Make sure we're doing things right from day one. Interested? Absolutely. They walked back to the entrance. The sun was setting, casting golden light through the windows. Marco leaned against the doorframe, looking around his clinic with quiet satisfaction. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Speaking up? All the trouble it caused." Ray thought about the sleepless nights, the fear, the moment she'd put that flash drive on the conference table knowing there was no going back.
"No," she said.
"Not once." "Good." The door opened and Luna burst in, ponytails flying, clutching a rolled-up paper. "Ray, I made something for you." She unfurled it, a drawing of a woman in scrubs with curly hair, standing in front of a building with a sign that said, "Luna's Light." Above the woman's head, Luna had drawn wings made of light. "It's you," Luna announced proudly. "My guardian nurse." Ray crouched down and pulled Luna into a hug. "It's perfect. You're perfect." Luna squeezed her tight. "Dad says you're a hero." "I'm not a hero, sweetie. I just tried to do the right thing."
Marco smiled.
"That's what heroes are." Ray stood, holding Luna's drawing carefully. She looked at Marco, this complicated man with his complicated past who'd protected her when the system wouldn't. She looked at Luna, the little girl whose smile had reminded her why any of this mattered. She thought about Dr. Bell, gone but not forgotten, about the protocols being rewritten, about this clinic that would serve people who needed care, not profit. The world wasn't perfect. The system wasn't fixed. There were still hospitals cutting corners, still people choosing money over safety, still battles to fight. But here, in this moment, standing in Luna's light with the sunset streaming through the windows. Here, something had changed. Not through violence, not through intimidation, through truth, through courage, through compassion. Ray looked down at the drawing in her hands, herself with wings, a guardian made of light. Maybe Luna was right. Maybe that's what heroes look like after all.